Just before we get started, if you're looking for the perfect tool, not only for completing your New Year's resolutions, but one that will help you build your life, then Fabulous is the app for you. More on them just a little bit later. Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Casual Criminalist. This one, Double Jeopardy, the incriminating ink of Paul Warner Powell. If you're new to this show, the format is one of my writers, in this case, Danny. Thank you, Danny, has written me a script. I'm going to read it, and we're going to explore, well, the case of Mr. Powell together, or Warner Powell, or I don't know how his name works, but let's go. "31-year-old Paul Warner Powell from Manassas in Virginia was most likely feeling a little apprehensive on the evening of the 17th of March 2010, and with very good reason. The very next day, he was due to be placed in the electric chair in the Greensville Correctional Center and executed by the state. Yeah, in terms of like apprehensions, that is going to be right up there the day before your execution, although maybe you'll have a nice dinner. However, he was not quite as nervous as you might think, because Powell had a bit of experience with this kind of situation. I don't mean he had experience with the whole getting executed by the electric chair thing. No, that would be dark. Either it just didn't work the first time, or what? Guests invited to take the hot seat don't usually get a chance to leave much feedback or make notes for next time. However, there have been cases where it hasn't worked, and it's just been insanely brutal, although I think they just keep on zapping the person until they die.
Well, I hope you like fried chicken.
Which is, whoever thought that was a good idea? What's wrong with you? We had firing squad. We had guns way before this. What's wrong with guns? If someone's like, do you want the electric chair or do you want me to shoot you in the head? I'll be like, shoot me in the head. Are you insane? You want to zap me and strap me into that scary ass chair that fries people? No. Or gas. What's wrong with gas?
It's exactly what the Nazis are looking for.
But he did have some experiences with hanging around and waiting to be potentially executed the very next day. In the past, he'd been granted unexpected last-minute reprieves, and it wasn't out of the question that he might get another. In fact, Paul Warner Powell had been playing musical electric chairs ever since he was first sentenced to death 10 years earlier. Daddy, that is a dark joke.
Come on, Danny.
But every time he was thrown a potential lifeline, Powell had an unending habit of writing himself into a new corner. And he would probably still be alive today if he'd taken the time to brush up on his law before composing a particularly nasty and ill-conceived letter, which would effectively make him the author of his own death warrant. Oh God, what has this guy done? Is he admitting to crimes while in prison for other crimes? Crimes that are going to get him executed? Why would you do that? I guess you could be like, well, I'm already in prison for life. What could be worse than that? And someone's like,
Yeah, mate, news for you. Virginia has the electric chair.
And they'd be like, oh no.
Come on, it's a great joke.
It's almost as if Paul Walker Powell killed himself with cockiness. But not everyone could agree on whether it was Powell or the US courts who really needed to take a much closer study of a particularly confusing law. No matter how many times it is stressed that writing down your crimes is an exceptionally bad idea, there's always some idiot criminal who insists on breaking the rules. I used to be kind of guilty of this myself back at school. Not that I ever dared break the law when I was a kid, but whereas I'm sure every school kid in the classroom has at some point leaned over to the kid next to them and whispered jokes or insults relating to the grumpy teacher, I think I always craved a bigger audience for my best material. And so I used to discreetly write down my scathing critique of a teacher's performance on a piece of paper and get everyone to pass it around the class whenever the teacher's back was turned. I felt this helped lighten the mood for everyone during a spectacularly grim lesson. Danny, what are you doing? Oh no, of course there's always some muppet who either giggles too loudly or bungles up the stealth operation of passing the note on to the next kid. On this particular occasion, I'd written a dense, multi-layered piece which explored several theories on exactly why our geography teacher, Mr. Turnbull, stank of dead cats. Mr. Turnbull's not going to like that, and the others probably all the dead cats in his apartments, where he keeps them. I say dense and multi-layered, it might have just been raw and quite primitive, but Mr. Turnbull had it coming after he'd just thrown a blackboard duster at me for sneezing provocatively in class. And I know Daddy's put like sneezing provocatively like an inverted comma in speech marks, so like, you know, Mr. Turnbull was like, you can't sneeze provocatively, but oh boy, did we sneeze provocatively at school. Because it's one of those things where you'd be like, no, I was just sneezing. Did you need to do it? Like, achoo! I'd be like, yes, I'm sorry, that's how I sneeze. You're going to put me in detention for sneezing? And then the teacher would be like, yes.
And then I'd be like,
Of course, Mr. Turnbull got hold of the offending piece of paper, and his shrewd detective skills instantly led him to the conclusion that I was the culprit. He always knew it was me. This was largely because I always inexplicably put my name at the bottom of these pieces like a complete imbecile.
Danny, you can't let them shame you.
Danny wants that clout. He's like passing those notes around. He's like, yeah, who came up with this genius critique about the dead cats? That's Danny. That's right. However, the story of Paul Warner Powell's writing credits is far from a flippant tale. It involved devastating consequences for the family of a victim who had been kind enough to offer Powell a hand of friendship, which didn't reach far enough for this utterly brutal man. In 1999, Stacey Lynn Reed was just 16 years old and harboring an unusual ambition. Stacey lived in the small town of Yorkshire in Manassas, Prince William County, Virginia, with her mother Lorraine, her stepfather Robert Culver, and her 14-year-old sister Christy. Stacey was a model student with good grades, and she was working hard to achieve her dream of joining the military. She'd recently enlisted in the Junior Reserves Officer Training Corps, and that unusual ambition of hers was to become the first ever Navy SEAL officer. When was this? 1999. Do they have female Navy SEAL officers? Navy SEALs? These days? It feels very dude-like, doesn't it? It's got to be a bit of a boys' club. But, well, good for you, aiming for that. In contrast, Paul Warner Powell, who lived just around the corner from Stacey, didn't appear to have such a bright future ahead of him. The 20-year-old man was an angry white supremacist who had endured a life of rejection and had very few friends. He'd already built up a small criminal record, including convictions for larceny and contributing to the delinquency of a minor. I don't know what contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Does that mean he took a kid out of school to, like, bunk off school together? Or is it something darker and worse? It could be, couldn't it? Because this is the casual criminal list. Also, this guy's just, this guy's going to have a rough life, because that is not a good start. Stacey had recently struck up a friendship with Powell. Okay. Reaching out a friendship to the reject. Although the rest of the family knew very little about him. Stacey's mother and stepfather had never met him, and younger sister Christy only knew the man's name. Powell had become infatuated with Stacey and clearly hoped for something much more than friendship, despite the fact that Stacey's young age would have made this legally problematic. Legally problematic, in other words, illegal. Stacey had always made it clear that she wasn't remotely interested anyway. She was happily dating a fellow member of the Officer Training Corps by the name of Sean Wilkerson, who had recently moved out of town but planned to meet up again with Stacey soon to attend a local military ball. Powell found it difficult to handle another rejection, but there was another factor which sent the white supremacist's feelings boiling over into an uncontrollable outrage. Sean Wilkerson was an African American. Unable to deal with the idea that his lecherous advances were being spurned in favor of a young man of color, Powell decided to pay Stacey a surprise visit on the afternoon of January the 29th, 1999. This is one of those, he's going to kill them, isn't he? And he's going to go to prison. And then he's going to say something in prison which gets him the electric chair. That's where this story's going, isn't it? We just straight into the horrible crimes today, aren't we, Danny? In his own later words, his purpose of the visit was to teach Stacey a lesson. He came equipped with a pistol, a bunch of knives, and a box cutter. Stacey was home alone as Powell waited outside the house for over an hour. He eventually let himself in while Stacey was taking a telephone call with her boyfriend Sean. After a startled Stacey hung up, Powell became agitated and demanded that Stacey break up the relationship with Sean. When Stacey told him where to go, the argument became increasingly heated, and Powell eventually resorted to making hostile sexual advances on Stacey whilst delivering a cold warning that they could do this the easy way or the hard way. Wow. So this is just such a sad story of guy starts off, he does these minor crimes, he's kind of a white supremacist dickhead, and then he does something that gets him put in prison for the rest of his life. Or the electric chair, ultimately. That's so intense. During Powell's protracted attempted rape, his victim fought him off, but in the face of stronger resistance than he may have been expecting, Powell pulled out a butterfly knife and stabbed Stacey repeatedly in the chest, arms, and back. Bleeding heavily, Stacey stumbled into her younger sister's bedroom, at which point Powell followed her and put his foot on her throat until Stacey stopped breathing. It was later confirmed that Stacey died from a stab wound to the chest, which had pierced her heart. There were also numerous bruises and cuts all over her body, including her head, neck, and wrist, some of which were described as defensive wounds. Fully aware that he'd just murdered Stacey, Powell chose not to flee the ghastly crime scene. Instead, he made himself comfortable, smoked a few cigarettes, drank some iced tea, and waited for Stacey's 14-year-old sister Christy to come home from school. Powell, you are a f***ing psycho. Just someone who can just do that is just like, you deserve him to be in prison for the rest of your life. Just lock you up and throw away the f***ing key. When Christy eventually walked through the door, she was surprised by the sight of Powell and concerned about the whereabouts of her sister. Powell casually told her that Stacie was just upstairs in the bedroom, but Christy was puzzled when she went up to the room and saw no sign of Stacie. Christy then went to have a look in her own bedroom, and this was where she found the dead body of her older sister on the floor. Powell had followed Christy up the stairs, and as she began to cry in terror, Powell pulled out the same butterfly knife and ordered her down to the basement, where he instructed her to take off her clothes and then raped her at knife point. How old was she? 14? What the f***? Christy made no attempt to resist, as she was petrified that Powell would kill her. The barbaric act was interrupted when there was a knock on the door. Christy had arranged for her school friend Mark Lewis to call rounds, and he'd arrived on time. Powell tied up Christy's arms behind her back with her own shoelaces and made his way upstairs for a potential confrontation, armed with his pistol. Mark Lewis knocked just a few more times and then gave up and walked back home, unaware that he had unwittingly escaped death at the hands of Powell, in all likelihood. During this brief distraction, Christy had tried to make her own attempt at an escape by loosening her bonds and shuffling across the basement floor, but this was all she could manage before Powell returned to the scene. He removed Christy's spectacles, strangled her with the shoelaces until she was unconscious, and then stabbed her multiple times in the neck and abdomen before slashing her wrists and leaving her to die in the basement. She's 14. What the... Powell still didn't seem in any great hurry to get out of the house. He went back upstairs, washed his hands, had some more f***ing iced tea. Are you s***ing me? Before he eventually decided to make his exit. This guy, Wait, does he get fried in the electric chair? Did we find that out? Was there a spoiler? Because you know what? I f***ing hope so.
I subscribe to your principles.
So just before we continue with today's episode, let me tell you about its fantastic sponsor, which is Fabulous. Fabulous is the digital coach that helps you build and improve healthy habits through personalized daily routine. As a happiness trainer, the Fabulous app uses insights from behavioral science to guide you towards the life that you want through positive reinforcement and science-backed daily routines. Yeah, just to interrupt what they wrote there. Like the difference between the wishy-washy self-help, just try this, do that, based on like someone's personal experience is like, no. When people involve science and research in these things, it just makes them so much better. So thank you, Fabulous, for doing that. And also thank you for the sponsorship. I just thought I'd add to your talking points there. With a community of over 30 million users worldwide, Fabulous makes it easy for anyone to develop healthy habits and stick with them. With habit tracking, you can pick from over 100 recommended daily habits or create your own, and Fabulous will help you build them with timely reminders and other features based on behavioral science principles. Now, I've been experimenting with this, and I've put a few in there. One of them is kind of like the stupidest one that I did, but it's like one of my favorite ones, is just to drink water. Like, I am someone, I'll like have 2 Cokes, and then I'll get home and I'll be like, why do I have a headache? Why am I so thirsty? It's like, oh yeah, because you don't drink any water, fact boy. So now I have this like Fabulous thing, and it pings me in the morning, and it's like chug down half a litre of water. So I just pour I've got a pint glass, I fill that pint glass with water, it's half a litre, Americans, and I just drink that bad boy, and I feel better. And I know it sounds silly, but it's really good. You can also choose a dedicated program, a journey that immerses you in your own personal adventure. Over several weeks, you'll receive regular lessons filled with inspiration and motivation. At the end of each lesson, you'll commit to positive action for the week. Your new habits will be added to your daily routine, and you'll receive gentle reminders to stay on track. Also, of course, it's 100% personalized to your needs. So, why wait? Start building your ideal daily habit routine with Fabulous today. The first 100 people to click on the link below will get 25% off a Fabulous subscription. Don't miss out. There's a lot of people who watch this show these days. So go down there, be one of the first 100. Don't miss out. Start your journey to a healthier, more fulfilling life with Fabulous now. There's a link below, and now back to the show. It later transpired that the first part of his plan had involved raping and killing both Stacie and Christy Reed. The next part of his plan had involved waiting until their mother and stepfather arrived home so that he could murder them for reasons that aren't entirely clear. The reason is, Danny, because he's a psycho. He may have felt that his name was less likely to get mentioned in a list of suspects if parents were out of the picture, but neither parent had ever even met him. For whatever reason, Powell changed his mind about the second phase and eventually left the house before Lorraine Reed and Robert Culver got home from work. He hooked up with one of his few friends and they took a drive to Washington, where they bought some drugs before heading over to his mate's girlfriend's house and ordering some pizza. Again, just the fact that he can just be sipping on that iced tea, just continuing with his regular life, just like, let's go for pizza, mate, after having murdered 2 children, is just like... I just don't think there are people more despicable. Obviously, there's more. You don't want to rank the despicability of people, but this guy is just bottom of the barrel trash human. But when they heard the knock on the door, they assumed that the pizza guy just arrived earlier than expected. In fact, it was the police. Against all odds, Christy Reed had survived her ordeal and had identified Paul Warner as her attacker. Legend. Wait, is Christy the younger one? Oh, f***ing legend. Let's go! Open and shut, Christy Reed. Stepfather Robert Culver is still haunted by regret over a decision he took on that working day. He was feeling a little ill and his boss told him to go home early and get some rest, but Robert politely refused, as he was worried that the girls might think that he had come home early to check up on them. Dude, this is such a horrible position to be in, Robert Culver, but this is not your fault in any way, and you're a good man for giving your kids that amount of slack. And I can't, I'm a father of 2 kids, and I cannot possibly imagine something like that happening to me. It's not your fault. Jesus. While it's only natural to imagine how a terrible incident may have turned out differently if you'd taken an alternative decision, I think it's important to bear in mind here that even if Robert Culver had come home early, he would have likely been completely unprepared for a situation which involved a wild man entering his home with a bunch of knives and a pistol. When Robert did arrive home at 4:15 p.m., he called out for the girls, but he heard no answer. After discovering Stacie's body on the floor in Christy's bedroom, he immediately ran to the telephone and dialed 911. It was during this initial conversation with the dispatcher that he first began to hear cries coming from the basement, and he dashed downstairs to find Christy naked, bound, and bleeding, but alive. Christy's throat had been slashed multiple times, and one of the wounds to her stomach had missed her carotid artery by less than half a centimeter. Her life hung in the balance, and she was evacuated by helicopter to hospital, where she underwent 5 hours of surgery, including 60 stitches to her throat. Now in her mid-30s, Christy still bears visible neck scars and suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder. When the police first arrived on the scene that night, Christy was understandably finding it very difficult to speak at all, yet she still somehow managed to quietly breathe just 2 words to the police. When one of the officers asked Christy who had done this to her, Christy summoned up all her strength to reply, "Paul Powell." Legend. The evidence was already piling up as Powell was hauled in for questioning by the police. His blue sports bag had been located, containing the semi-automatic pistol and the butterfly knife, the sheath of which was stained with blood, later confirmed to match the DNA profile of Stacie Reed. This guy's an idiot. This guy is an idiot psycho. Just low IQ. It's just, this guy's probably got an IQ of 80 something. And it's just, inability to foresight, inability to plan, just not able to get things right, not able to do things correctly, and open and shut. The police had found a drawstring from Powell's sweatshirt under Stacie's body. What was I saying? The very, very small and smooth brain, Mr. Powell. One of the police detectives tasked with questioning Powell was Richard Leonard, who had got to know Powell a little from his earlier offences. Richard Leonard found that Powell didn't seem to have a problem with admitting responsibility for the death of Stacie, but seemed more uncomfortable in confessing that he'd raped her younger sister. Powell initially told the police that Stacie Reed was dead because she was stupid. He claimed to have become involved in a heated argument with Stacie because he didn't approve of interracial dating. Brilliant excuse there, mate. Why did you kill her? Because interracial dating, that doesn't make you look better. I mean, it does make you look better to the f***ing KKK. When Stacie became violent and started scratching his face, Powell claimed that he'd tried to defend himself and she accidentally got stuck on his knife. Oh yeah, it's like, whoops, my knife accidentally slipped into her. Jesus Christ. It was only during his second interview that Powell reluctantly admitted to raping and attempting to murder Christy Reed. Although he still seemed unwilling to discuss the details of the rape, he told police that he had felt no choice but to murder Christy, as she could testify against him in court. He may have admitted to the rape of Christy Reed, but an important point to note here is that he didn't admit to the attempted rape of Stacie Reed before her murder, and in fact, he was never initially charged with this. Instead, Paul Warner Powell was charged with the capital murder of Stacie Reed and the attempted murder, rape, and abduction of Christy Reed. Okay, wait, so he's basically
completely screwed.
Charged with everything except for the rape, attempted rape of the older sister, which, I mean, I guess that's fine with the police or whatever, because there's enough here to send him away forever or to the chair, right? So is that why? He was held in prison without bail, during which period he suddenly overcame his reticence to discuss what he did to Christy, and repeatedly boasted to other inmates that he'd raped a 14-year-old virgin. Whoa, dude, I don't like even thinking about you as a person. You piece of trash. It was during Powell's initial stay in prison that he first displayed a surprising propensity for writing revealing letters, although he was still some way off from penning the letter that would seal his fate. Considering Powell's apparent infatuation with Stacey, it's perhaps surprising to learn that one of the recipients of his many letters was his girlfriend. Wait, Powell had a girlfriend? Some woman actually liked this piece of shit of a human being? This oxygen-stealing mofo? The other recipients included the Prince William County Commonwealth Attorney Paul Ebert, who would be the prosecutor in the case, and Stacey and Christie's mother, Lorraine Reed. If anyone was hoping that Powell might take this opportunity to express the slightest hint of remorse for his vile actions, they'd be more than disappointed. I don't think anyone was expecting that from this oxygen thief. Oh well, maybe one of the letters to his girlfriend came reasonably close. After Powell took the time to express his annoyance in very crude terms that Stacey didn't have a problem with dating people of color, he went on to assure his girlfriend that he would never treat her in the same way as Stacey, and that Christie's rape wasn't planned beforehand. Oh yeah, Powell, you won't be treating her that way, because you'll be in prison forever, and then ultimately meet your fate in the electric chair where you belong.
I've reached my verdict.
He outlined more details of what he had in mind when he visited the Reeds' house. To quote, "Almost everything that happens in that house was planned. What was supposed to happen was Stacey was supposed to die, and did. Christie was supposed to die, and then I was going to wait for their mum and stepdad to get home. I was going to kill them all, and then I was going to take their mum's truck, and I was going to go to North Carolina and knock this dude off that stole all of my clothes and everything else I owned. I had been thinking about doing it for a long time, but I could never bring myself to do it. I felt bad for doing it. Stacey was a good kid." What are you talking about? If those last few sentences display a flicker of remorse, it was somewhat cancelled out by the venomous threat in his brisk follow-up letter, which asked his girlfriend for a friendly helping hand. "Hey babe, what's happening? Not too much here. I'm writing you to see if you could get one of your guy friends to do me a favor. You know that Christie is telling the cops things and that she's going to testify against me in court. I was wondering if you could get somebody to go to a payphone and call Christie and tell her that she better tell the cops that she lied to them and that she better not testify in court against me or she's going to die." I guess it was witness intimidation. But I guess when you're on trial for murder, give it a shot. What have you got to lose? You're going to go get all sparky anyway? Give it a crack. Powell's letter to attorney Paul Ebert isn't quite as easy to convey in this video, as it's essentially a little more than hateful racist bile, which uses appalling language to illustrate Powell's views on African Americans, Paul Ebert, and Stacey Reed. The opening line is one of the least offensive in the whole letter. "Fat Ebert, what's up, you fathead?" Yeah, I mean, who cares? Like, this guy's an idiot. He's writing letters. Why do people... I wouldn't even bother reading that. If I got that, I'd be like, okay. It's like emails. I get lots of emails and lots of messages and all that stuff. And some of them are really unpleasant. Do I read them? No, it's like I read the title, or I read like, and I'm like, okay, delete. Because I don't need that negativity in my life. I just want to live in a beautiful, positive place where everyone just sends me fan mail and praise and tells me how brilliant I am.
Yeah, on YouTube.
I mean, not really. I'm open to like constructive criticism, but you know, if it's just hateful, it's like, just f off. I don't care. In between those opening and closing lines, Powell asked Paul Ebert, in the foulest way imaginable, to either bring the court date closer so that he can get it over with, or to let him out so that he can kill everyone in the county who isn't white. Oh my.
Stupid white man.
Believe it or not, that's not even the nastiest letter that Paul wrote during this period. Wait, sorry, country. Kill everyone in the country. There's a letter that's worse than saying, I'm going to kill all non-white people in the entire country. That's some bad shit, dude, and I bet he used some pretty foul language in describing it. Powell posted Lorraine a picture of a naked woman that he had cut out from the pages of Playboy magazine. The model in the photograph bore a remarkable resemblance to Stacey Reed. Powell's accompanying letter appeared uncharacteristically polite on the surface, but the clear intent was sickening. Lorraine, I was wondering if you might be able to help me. I found this picture in a magazine, and it kind of looks like someone I know or used to know, but can't think of the person's name. I think you know the person too, so I was wondering if you could tell me the name of the person that this picture resembles so I can quit racking my brain. If you don't know the person I'm talking about, ask Christie, because I know she knows who I'm thinking of. You sick f***, man. Christie Reed bravely testified against Powell on the witness stand without ever looking him in the eye during his first trial in Virginia in February 2000. Although Powell pleaded not guilty, it didn't take long for the jury to consider the weight of the evidence against him and reach a verdict. On May the 5th, 2000, the jury found Paul Warner Powell guilty of the capital murder of Stacey Reed and the rape and attempted murder of Christie Reed. The jury recommended the death penalty. Excellent. This is Virginia, right? I feel like Virginia is one of those states where they'll be like, you know, you hear Virginia and you're like, they got the death penalty. They do. They got it. They're going to use it. And in this case, great work, Virginia. The judge agreed with the jury's findings, noting that Powell's conduct was outrageously or wantonly vile, horrible, or inhuman, and that it involved depravity of mind and aggravated battery to the victim beyond the minimum necessary to accomplish the act of murder. Powell was sentenced to death and taken to Sussex State Prison to spend the remainder of his days on death row. There was one quite bizarre twist to the trial involving the forewoman on the jury, Jennifer Day. After learning that the judge intended to act on the jury's recommendation and sentence Powell to death, Jennifer suddenly became tortured by guilt over her part in Powell's planned execution. Pausing to reflect on this for a while, it's perhaps not as strange as it may sound. I don't know, I don't think it's strange at all. Some people, no matter how horrible the crime, just don't believe in the death penalty. And I think that's fine. It's just like a personal moral thing. Personally, I started this show and I was always a bit conflicted on the death penalty because I was kind of like, no, shouldn't be a thing. But if anyone killed my family, yeah, I'd kind of want them to be killed. And after doing this show, I've kind of been like, and this is always discussed. I know it's kind of just a boring trope of the show at this point, but some people deserve to die. And the problem is, like, all of the people we're discussing on this show, it's like, we know they're guilty, they deserve to die. The problem is, when you look at it in a grander perspective, there are people on death row who don't deserve to be there because they are innocent. Like, no matter how unlikely it is, there are some people, and there have been people who've been executed, and we've later found out they're innocent, which is a whole other issue. So, no, I think it's totally fine that someone on the jury is like, I don't know, I'm not sure, and maybe I changed my mind. Because don't all the jurors have to say death? And then just one would be like, okay, no death, just life imprisonment. So I understand why she's morally conflicted. It's one thing to be involved in the recommendation of sentencing to a criminal to prison, but it's likely to play heavier on the mind if you're an ordinary person who has been randomly chosen to serve on a jury which ends up making a life or death decision on a human being. And the burden of responsibility must feel even heavier when you're the forewoman who has to vocally confirm the jury's recommendation to the court that a human being should die. Jennifer's subsequent actions were far from ordinary, though. Very shortly after delivering the verdict, Jennifer rushed over to the jail to meet Powell and offer him $30. Okay. She would later develop a relationship with Powell, visiting him in prison to give him more money and exchanging regular telephone calls and letters with him in which the pair began to refer to each other as soulmates. What are you doing, Jennifer? You sat and you listened to all of the horrible, horrible shit he did. What is broken in your brain that makes you do this, Jennifer?
I'm very confused.
Jennifer, you need to see a psychiatrist immediately. Powell's letters to Jennifer were of considerably gentler nature than his previously enraged scribblings and taunts, although he still showed a flare of defiance when he informed Jennifer that he was going to fight against the death penalty. They're going to have to work for my death. Even if Powell's convictions had been quashed and he had been set free, I can't help feeling this would have been a difficult relationship to pursue in the long term. I mean, the circumstances of their meeting were bound to come up in future romantic dinner conversations and nostalgic reflections, weren't they? Here, Jennifer, do you remember that time you sentenced me to death? What an absolute palaver.
Jennifer is unwell.
Oh, don't worry, you'll not be having those conversations because you'll be in jail forever. If you get let off on the death penalty... that doesn't mean that you're not. It's like, oh yeah, no, he's doing no more death penalty. Sweet, freedom. No, it just means you're going to be in prison for the rest of your life and you're going to die in jail. For now, though, Jennifer clearly regretted the role she played in the death sentence and would later return to the courts, but this time in Powell's defense. Just over a year later, in June 2001, the capital murder verdict was thrown out on appeal in the Virginia Supreme Court, and the reasoning sounded utterly bonkers to me. Powell was still found to be very much guilty of rape and attempted murder, and was still destined to spend the rest of his life in prison after receiving 3 life sentences. But the issue was with the original guilty verdict on the capital murder of STACIE Reed. The capital punishment laws in Virginia are a bit more complicated than in most US states, where the death penalty can be legally served on someone found guilty of first-degree murder. In Virginia, a death sentence is only applicable if a person is found guilty of capital murder, which must involve one or more aggravating factors. So far, so simple. These factors can include the murder of a child or the murder of a police officer. I kind of feel like I don't think there should be death penalty for first-degree murder. I'm kind of with Virginia on this one. I think this is a very good extra definition. I think if you're multiple murderer or murder a child or a police officer, something aggravating, then I like that. I think that's a really good law. But more significantly, they can also include the attempted robbery or rape of the victim prior to the murder. That doesn't sound so aggravated, in my opinion. It was felt by the Virginia Supreme Court that the original court had treated the murder of Stacey and the rape and attempted murder of Christie as the same single crime, and so therefore the rape and attempted murder of Christie could be considered an aggravating factor to Stacey's murder. Wow, that is some clever legal maneuvering. Although, isn't rape... Okay, so, sorry, but more simply, robbery or attempted rape of the victim prior to the murder can be considered. Oh, I see. So, because he was never convicted of... There was no aggravating factor because he never admitted to the attempted rape of Stacey, the first victim. So there was nothing aggravated there, and he didn't successfully murder Christie, the younger daughter. So he's kind of sitting in between these two things, but the courts are cleverly saying, no, the first crime was aggravating the second crime because it was, we're considering it as one crime unit in a way. Okay. Oh my God, I can see why there is some clever legal maneuvering available there for some lawyers, right? Oh my God, I just realized how he's going to get busted. He's gonna admit to the original rape, isn't he? He's going to admit to, in a letter that he did try and rape the older girl, and then that's going to be an aggravating factor. They're going to take it back to court and he's going to get the death penalty. Oh my God, that's going to be it, isn't it? Please tell me that's it. Oh my God, you clown. This is going to be so sweet if this is what happens. However, it was now ruled that the two incidents were entirely separate, as a little bit of time had elapsed between the two events. That clever legal maneuvering. In order for Powell to be convicted of capital murder, it must first have been proven that Powell had attempted to rape or rob Stacey before the murder. Powell had never admitted to the attempted rape of Stacey, and there was insufficient evidence to prove otherwise. So, it appears that if it could be proven that Powell had attempted to pick his victim's pockets before the murder, he would have still faced a death sentence. But in the absence of any such aggravating factors, the original verdict was thrown out, and Powell had been gifted a lifeline, albeit a lifeline to spend the rest of his days in prison. Later, that very same year, Powell decided to celebrate the victorious result of the appeal by writing another wacky letter to prosecutor Paul Ebert. Oh, Paul is gonna get you. He's gonna get you. Yeah, it's gonna be good. At this point, Powell was under the belief that he was completely safe from the electric chair thanks to the double jeopardy clause, so he was now at liberty to confess to anything he damn well liked without consequence.
How stupid can one person be?
Wait. Doesn't double jeopardy apply to something you've been prosecuted for? Because the reason his lawyers managed to get him off on the death penalty was because he hasn't admitted to raping the older girl before murdering her. So he's never been prosecuted for that. So he doesn't have double jeopardy on it. And I think this is where this guy's probably going to be an idiot, going to get himself killed, right? And some might suggest that you really can't blame him, or even that he was completely right to hold this belief. I mean, the double jeopardy clause is a curious concept. We thankfully exiled it for good in England and Wales about 20 years ago. The basic principle of the old creaky procedural defense is that a person should never be tried twice for the same crime, or put in legal jeopardy if they have already been acquitted of the charges. This is primarily to avoid situations in which perfectly innocent parties find themselves in constant persecution from people wealthy enough to keep on dragging them back to court to face the same charges over and over again. Yeah, it seems, on the face of things, to be pretty good. The exact rules have been sensibly updated in some countries over the years. For example, we largely got rid of double jeopardy in England and Wales in 2003, following the botched investigation into the racially motivated murder of black teenager Stephen Lawrence in 1989. Some of the prime suspects were originally acquitted of the murder, but it was later concluded that the investigation had been conducted in an incompetent manner by an institutionally racist police force. Two of the original suspects were eventually found guilty of the murder in 2012, but this only became possible following the Criminal Justice Act of 2003, which included the introduction of measures designed to specifically tackle issues relevant to this case. Yeah, I mean, if there's a reason to go back and look at the case again, I think you should. Like, if someone's innocent of murder, right? And that's fine. And then the police later on discover that in their garden was buried a gun which has their fingerprints on and perfectly matches everything. Then it'll be like, well, there's a lot of new evidence. Or if it turns out the police are institutionally racist, shocking. Then sure, go back and reopen things. That's not what the law was made for, which was apparently to stop rich people just harassing people with endless court cases. The new act stated that a suspect of a grave offense can still face a retrial if fresh and viable evidence has been brought to light. Excellent. Good. That sounds pretty reasonable to me. It's not out of the question that, for example, continual advances in forensic science could reveal new and utterly compelling evidence that would have been impossible to uncover during the original trial. However, other countries such as the US, Canada, and Mexico still take a different stance, with their view that protection from double jeopardy is a constitutional right, and that not guilty verdict from a jury is set in stone, which seems bizarre if there's new evidence. In the US, the Fifth Amendment clearly states, "Nor shall any person be subject for the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb." Now that's all very well, but there's a bit of scope for abuse here. Anyone wrongly found to be innocent of a charge is now utterly immune from facing justice, even if indisputable evidence is dug up years later. So while someone absolutely shouldn't, they could go outside and be like, yeah, guess what? It was me, I got you all fools. And then just apparently carry on with life, which is insane. And you should definitely not do that, because you might, just in case, just go live your life. You got away with it. Well done. He or she could make a televised confession to Oprah Winfrey or write a best-selling book containing all of the juicy details about how they got away with it, and they would still be completely untouchable. Are we referring to a certain famous movie star and sports player? Yeah. At the very least, they could write a taunting letter to the prosecutor who failed to secure the right conviction, generously advising where exactly they went wrong with the case. And this brings us right back to Paul Warner Powell. Again, we have no wish to reproduce the letter in full, as it's largely an obscene rant filled with hateful language. Essentially, Powell appears to take glee in describing in vivid detail how he did indeed attempt to rape Stacey Reed before her murder, and he thanks Paul Ebert for saving him from the capital murder sentence. Here are some heavily edited segments of this particular note. Mr. Ebert, since I have already been indicted on first-degree murder and the Virginia Supreme Court said that I can't be charged with capital murder again, I figured I would tell you the rest of what happened on January the 29th, 1999. Wait, so he can't be charged with capital murder again, but can he be charged with aggravated capital murder again? Because I feel that that's exactly what's going to happen. Sorry, the note continues. To show you how stupid you are. You all should have known that there is more to the story than what I told. You had it in writing that I planned to kill the whole family. Since I planned to kill the whole family, why would I have fought with Stacey before killing her? I could have stabbed her up at any time because she was unsuspecting. I had other plans for her before she died. Uh-oh, and there are you signing your death warrant. Other plans? Oh, God. After going into horrific detail on the rape and murder, Powell continued, "You saved my life by f***ing up. Now you all know everything that happened in that house. I guess I forgot to mention these events when I was being questioned. And y'all are supposed to be so goddamn smart." He then goes on to reference his upcoming sentencing date, which would see him receive those 3 life sentences. "Tell the family to be ready to testify and relive it all again, because if I have to suffer for the next 50 or 60 years or however long, then they can suffer the torment of reliving what happened for a couple of days. Die a slow, painful, miserable death. Do you hate yourself for being so stupid and for f***ing up and saving me? Sincerely, Paul Powell." Paul Ebert wasn't the least bit offended by the VAR letter. In fact, he was pretty chuffed to receive it, as Powell had surely just provided him with the fresh evidence required to force a retrial. Taking the double jeopardy clause into account, some may find it odd that a retrial was granted. Excellent. I find it not that odd.
You're so screwed.
Not every judge agreed with the decision, and we'll come back to the reasoning in a moment. But in the meantime, any judge who's like, yeah, no, the interpretation of the law is retrial! Woo-hoo! Because he just admitted to it. And this guy. The letter of the law. And I still think they can get around that, as they're going to do, because he's going to die. It's going to be great. But in the meantime, Powell was somewhat taken aback to find himself on trial again in 2003 for the capital murder of Stacey Reed, with his own letter to Paul Ebert serving as the main slice of new compelling evidence. His demeanor and attitude had noticeably changed since his earlier court appearances, in which it displayed a lofty arrogance and a sadistic nature. On this occasion, Powell was quiet, subdued, and he occasionally broke down in tears. Maybe he had finally begun to feel some remorse for his actions, or maybe it was beginning to sink in that he really shouldn't have written such a cocky letter. An unusual choice of witness attended court to testify on Paul's behalf. Oh, it's the previous jury foreman, wasn't it? What the are you up to, Jennifer? It was none other than Jennifer Day, the forewoman of the original jury, who had recommended that Powell be served with the death penalty. Jennifer declared to the court that she loved Powell and that she had made the wrong decision on that day. She now believed that Powell was very sorry and didn't deserve to die. But this did nothing to sway the verdict of the next generation jury. After just 90 minutes of deliberation, the jury found Paul Warner Powell to be guilty of capital murder, and the judge once again sentenced Powell to death. Powell's own boastful letter had dragged him right back to the electric chair. It seems to take a long time for death row to get around to executing their prisoners. Powell's original execution date was set for July 2007, but it was stayed until further instruction from the court as they considered the constitutional claims of the defense. It was rescheduled for the 14th of July 2009, but just one day before Powell was due to take the hot seat, the execution was once again stayed as the US Supreme Court still hadn't made up its mind about whether Powell was unconstitutionally convicted twice for the very same offense in violation of the Double Jeopardy Clause. The Reed family were understandably feeling distressed about the continued delays in seeing any kind of closure to an ongoing ordeal that had now been stretched out for over a decade. On the day that Powell's execution was delayed again in 2009, Christy Reed told the press, "I was totally against the death penalty before this happened, and I didn't know why people would want to do it. But those people haven't been through what we've been through. Now I'm totally for it. He definitely deserves to die. He needs to die for what he did to Stacey. I need to know that he's gone, that we don't have to deal with this anymore." I'm just realizing that Danny at the beginning didn't say whether he was going to get executed, and this is going to the Supreme Court for them to decide on whether that double jeopardy thing was legal or not. So I don't know if he's going to die. Oh God, I hope he's dead. I hope this bastard's dead. But was it entirely lawful that Powell had been sentenced to death for a second time? Powell's lawyer didn't seem to think so. He argued that the retrial failed to even address the matter of double jeopardy. He noted there is no legal logic in there that got them around it. Basically, the bottom line is, they said this case is different. It's interesting to note that the Supreme Court of Virginia had made the following declaration after Powell's original death sentence was thrown out in 2001. Quote, "Having already determined that Powell's conviction for capital murder will be reversed, we now further determine that there is no basis upon which Powell can be retried for capital murder on remand." End quote. Even one of the 3 federal judges in the U.S. Fourth Circuit of Appeals, who would be ultimately responsible for considering whether Powell had a right to appeal his fresh death sentence on constitutional grounds, felt strongly that the second conviction constituted double jeopardy and insisted that the case be thrown out in fear of it setting a dangerous new precedent. The dangerous new precedent is that people who deserve to go to court again go to court again. I don't see how it's that complicated. It was set up originally to stop people being harassed by the courts. We don't have any evidence of that. What we do have evidence of is a guy admitting to horrible crimes that come with the death penalty as the punishment, and him getting the death penalty. Simple. But here's the thing. The double jeopardy clause only comes into force when a subject has been found not guilty by a jury, and in this case, that didn't happen. Paul Warner Powell's original conviction for capital murder was thrown out or overturned by the Virginia Supreme Court. In a sense, that's a bit like pretending the original conviction never happened. It's not the same as a definitive acquittal of the crime. At no point had Powell been declared not guilty of capital murder by a jury. So when Powell began penning his spiteful letter to Paul Liebert, he was unaware that he could technically be tried for the same capital murder of which he had never been acquitted. Despite the sole dissenting voice of federal Judge Justice Roger L. Gregory in the U.S. Fourth Circuit of Appeals, Powell's appeal was rejected without comment in a 2-1 ruling. And this brings us right back to March the 17th, 2010, on which the 31-year-old Powell was looking ahead to another rescheduled execution the following day. This time there would be no last-minute reprieve, and new Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell had put paid to any remaining hopes of the execution getting rained off by declining Powell's clemency petition. It's weird that the governor of a state can be like, and you don't get executed, despite, the whole process that got them to there. Why is that a thing? It's very strange. Powell had spent about 90 minutes of his last full day on a conference call to the Reed family, during which he finally appeared to express some remorse, although Mother Lorraine noted that he conveyed remorse in his own way. Lorraine told the press that she had forgiven Powell, but still supported the execution, and she felt that the Reed family had left the conference call with some feelings of peace. She revealed he was able to say he was sorry, and he made the point several times that his crime was senseless and pointless. He couldn't really give us any reason why. He wasn't belligerent, he didn't raise his voice. It was very civil. I did ask him at one point if he had forgiven himself, and he got emotional and said no. I feel like this is his last shot, though. Like, the governor said he's not going to grant clemency, but if the family then said to the governor, we don't actually want him to get executed, then maybe the governor would change his mind. I think it's a very, very, very slim shot, but it's literally the only shot he's got at this point of saving his life. So I'm not surprised I think he's faking it. By this time, the original jury forewoman, Jennifer Day, had moved on with her life, married, and embarked upon a new career. Good, Jennifer, and try to forget that ever happened, okay? She now wishes that she had never served on the jury and never met Powell. Jennifer had eventually broken contact with Powell after becoming concerned over the tone and content of some of those later letters. She now believes everything had changed. He did it to himself. At first, I thought he was sorry, but it's like he had a split personality. I can sleep at night now. He did what he did, and he's getting what he deserves. Powell chose the electric chair over the default method of lethal injection. Jesus, why? These are both horrible. Like, lethal injection is botched all the time. Electric chair is botched all the time. What's wrong with firing squads? That is what I would choose. On March the 18th, 2010, he was led to the execution chamber at Greensville Correctional Center and strapped to the chair, observed by Lorraine and Christy Reed through one-way glass. Powell was asked if he had any final words, but he remained completely silent, perhaps all too aware that he'd already said far too much. He was pronounced dead at 9:09 p.m. Following the execution, prosecutor Paul Liebert revealed that he'd become emotionally involved in the case and was now considered to be a member of the Reed family. He told the press, "I've been in this business a long time, and I'm pretty callous. This case is more tragic than most I've witnessed because of the ages and personalities of the victims. From the get-go, if anyone deserved the death penalty, Paul Powell deserved it. He's the poster child for the death penalty, in my opinion. The survivors have really been traumatized by delay after delay. Hopefully they're going to get some peace and closure after all these years." Paul Liebert also observed, "Powell's was very much a more gentle death than Stacie's." I don't want to wish cruel and unusual punishment on anyone, but it would have been a real shame if that lethal injection or that electric chair had gone wrong for him, wouldn't it? Someone forgets to put the water on the sponge, like in that, is it the Green Mile? It's not very often you hear of cases in which the accused does a more efficient job of handling the prosecution than the prosecutors. And it's equally rare that you hear of a convicted criminal escaping the death sentence only to place himself right back on the electric chair with his own words. I mean, surely this has only happened once. Exactly how you feel about the death of Paul Warner Powell may depend on how you feel about the death penalty in general. I've never agreed with the death penalty myself, possibly because it was abolished in the UK long before I was born, and so the very concept of state execution seems quite disturbing to me. I would have thought that one of the most fundamentally important factors in this case, alongside justice for the Reed family, was to protect the public from Paul Warner Powell and to ensure that he never walked free again. I would have felt satisfied in the knowledge that Powell would be incarcerated for the rest of his life, although it may have been a plan to keep him away from the stationery cupboard, just in case he felt the urge to pen another masterpiece. But having said that, I have no idea how I'd feel about the death sentence under very different circumstances. Christy Reed also opposed the death penalty, right up until the day Powell walked into her home. Yeah, and I'm with Danny. Like, I don't, generally I'm like, I don't want that. I think the state executing people is weird. But then it always comes back to like, and I always find myself putting myself in the shoes of these people who've been the victims of these horrible crimes. And what would they want? And if they want the person to die, more power to them, to be honest. If Powell had left it another 20 years before writing the most important letter of his life and death, he would have escaped the electric chair yet again, not because of any changes to the double jeopardy clause and not because of any specific changes to Virginia laws which state that murder is only a capital offense if you attempt to rob your victim beforehand, which is clearly crossing a line. Powell would have escaped the electric chair simply because Virginia abolished the death penalty in March 2021. Some people may argue that double jeopardy clause is still open to abuse in countries where it's still considered to be a constitutional right, and some may still be scratching their heads at the fuzzy logic surrounding the legality of Paul Warner Powell's retrial. No, I think it's pretty clear. I think the judges were right. No matter your opinion on the death penalty and whatnot, I think double jeopardy didn't apply to him because he wasn't found not guilty. Simple. Legal maneuvering. It's little wonder that the man himself got so confused, particularly as he had been wrongly told by the Supreme Court of Virginia in 2001 that there could be no basis for a retrial. Yeah, that's a fairly big authority to tell you that. I feel there would have been... I hope his defense lawyers at least tried that defense, because there should be something there. But in this deeply unusual case, it seems to me that the judges involved in granting the retrial were very strict in following the law to the letter. And that's where we end today's episode. Thank you so much for watching. If you're watching on YouTube or listening, please leave a review, smash the like button, leave a comment, blah, blah, blah. And I'll see you next time.